The iron door of the asylum clanged shut behind Persephone Ainsley, her screams of protest lost in the howling winds of the Montana Territory, 1876. Inside the cold stone walls of Whispering Pines Asylum for Troubled Women, her spirit, once as wild and free as the mustangs that roamed the plains, would be broken, or so Dr. Harrington had promised her father. Rain pelted the windows of the carriage as it pulled away, carrying with it her last glimpse of freedom. The asylum loomed against the darkening sky, a fortress designed not to keep danger out, but to keep women like her contained, women who dared to speak their minds, women who refused to be tamed. "You'll learn to be a proper lady here, Miss Ainsley," Dr. Harrington said, his fingers closing around her arm with bruising force. "Your father has paid handsomely to cure you of your wildness." Persephone lifted her chin, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "You cannot cure what is not an illness, doctor." His smile never reached his eyes. "We shall see." 3 days into her confinement, Persephone understood the true horror of her situation. The asylum was filled with women whose only crime had been inconvenience, wives who questioned their husbands, daughters who refused arranged marriages, women who dared to own property or express opinions. Their treatment was brutal. Ice baths for hysteria, isolation for rebelliousness, and laudanum to keep them docile. Persephone resisted. Each time they tried to break her, she fought harder. Even when they locked her in solitary confinement, even when they withheld food, she refused to surrender her spirit. But as days turned to weeks and weeks to months, she began to fear that the walls would indeed be her tomb. Spring had turned to summer, and summer to autumn, by the time Victor Kincaid rode into Montana Territory, his horse's hooves kicking up dust on the trail leading to Helena. The tall cowboy with the storm-gray eyes and sun-weathered face had come north from Wyoming after 5 years driving cattle and breaking horses. At 28, he had decided it was time to put down roots, to find land of his own. Victor had heard of good grazing land available near Helena, and had accepted a temporary position at the Crossed Arrow Ranch while he saved money to purchase his own spread. The foreman had been impressed with his skill with horses, even those deemed unbreakable, and had put him in charge of training the ranch's newest acquisitions. It was on a supply run to town that Victor first heard whispers of the asylum on the hill. "Terrible place," the shopkeeper murmured as he wrapped Victor's purchases. "They say some of them women ain't even mad, just inconvenient to someone with money and influence." Victor's interest was piqued. "What do you mean?" The older man glanced around and lowered his voice. "Had a woman in here last week, works as a laundress up there. Says there's a young lady been there near 6 months now. Daughter of some big railroad investor from back east. Story goes, she refused to marry the man her father picked out, then ran off with some wild horse tamer. Father found her, had her declared insane." "That doesn't sound like insanity to me," Victor said, his jaw tightening. "Ain't just her, plenty of women locked away for reading too much, or wanting to vote, or just speaking their minds." The shopkeeper shook his head. "They call it female hysteria. I call it a crime." As Victor rode back to the ranch, he couldn't shake the shopkeeper's words from his mind. His own mother had been a strong-willed woman who had taught him that a person's worth wasn't determined by their gender. The thought of women being imprisoned for their spirits troubled him deeply. 2 weeks later, Victor found himself riding past the asylum while returning from breaking a particularly difficult stallion for a neighboring rancher. The imposing stone building with its barred windows made his skin crawl. As he passed, he noticed a woman in the garden, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. Despite the drab gray dress that hung from her thin frame, she stood tall, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Something about her posture, the longing in her stance, made Victor rein in his horse. He watched as an orderly approached her, saying something that made her shoulders stiffen. When she didn't move quickly enough, the man grabbed her arm roughly. Victor's blood boiled at the sight, but before he could act, the woman twisted free with surprising strength and said something that made the orderly step back. Victor couldn't help but smile. Even caged, this woman had fire. It was pure chance that brought him back to the asylum a week later. The head doctor had sent word to the Crossed Arrow, looking for someone to break a horse that had been donated to the institution. The regular horse trainer was laid up with a broken leg, and Victor's reputation had spread. "You understand, Mr. Kincaid, that we require the animal to be completely docile," Dr. Harrington explained as they walked toward the stables behind the main building. "Our orderlies are not experienced horsemen." Victor nodded, though the request troubled him. Breaking a horse's spirit wasn't the same as training it. "I'll do what I can, Doctor." The horse was a beautiful buckskin mare, wild-eyed and nervous. Victor spoke softly to her, recognizing the fear in her movements. As he worked with the animal in the small paddock, he became aware of someone watching him from the garden. It was the auburn-haired woman he had seen before. This time, he could see her face clearly, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of summer leaves. Despite the pallor of confinement, she was striking. But it was the intelligence in her gaze as she watched him work that caught his attention. She wasn't just observing, she was analyzing his technique. When the orderly turned away to speak to another staff member, the woman approached the fence. "She's afraid," she said quietly. "They whip her when she won't obey." Victor kept his voice low. "I can see that. I won't hurt her." "I know." The woman's lips curved slightly. "I've been watching you. You understand her." Before Victor could respond, the orderly noticed their interaction and rushed over, grabbing the woman's arm. "Miss Ainsley, you know you're not to speak to visitors." Victor stepped forward instinctively. "She was just telling me about the horse." "Miss Ainsley has delusions about animals," the orderly said dismissively. "Part of her condition?" The woman, Miss Ainsley, didn't protest, but her eyes met Victor's with a silent plea before she was led away. That night, Victor couldn't sleep. The woman's eyes haunted him, along with the orderly's casual dismissal of her words. She hadn't seemed delusional. She'd observed something real about the horse that only someone with knowledge would notice. Over the next 2 weeks, Victor returned to the asylum daily to work with the mare. Each time, he looked for the auburn-haired woman. Sometimes he caught glimpses of her in the garden or watching from a window. Twice, she managed to speak to him briefly when the orderlies were distracted. He learned her name was Persephone, that she had been in the asylum for nearly 7 months, and that her treatment included regular doses of laudanum to keep her compliant. She spoke lucidly and intelligently about horses, about literature, about the world beyond the asylum walls. There was no trace of madness in her words or her eyes, only a desperate longing for freedom. "Why are you really here?" she asked during their third brief conversation. Victor hesitated, then told the truth. At first, it was just for the horse. Now, I'm not sure. Persephone's gaze was direct. "They'll never let me out, you know. Not unless my father allows it, and he won't. Not until I agree to marry Edward Blackwell." "The man your father chose?" She nodded. "A business associate 30 years my senior, with a reputation for cruelty toward his servants and his previous wife." Victor's jaw tightened. "That's why you ran?" "I ran because I wanted to live my own life. I worked at a ranch in Wyoming, breaking horses. I was good at it." Pride flashed in her eyes. "But women aren't supposed to want such things." An orderly approached, and Persephone quickly moved away. Victor returned to the mare, his mind racing. Something had to be done. The more he spoke with Persephone, the more certain he became that she was being unjustly held. That evening, Victor sought out the laundress the shopkeeper had mentioned. Martha Wilson was a widow in her 50s who needed the work at the asylum to support herself. After some persuasion and the promise of financial compensation, she agreed to tell him what she knew. "Miss Ainsley ain't crazy, not one bit," Martha confirmed. "Smart as a whip, that one. Reads every book she can get her hands on. Dr. Harrington keeps trying different treatments because she won't break. Some of the orderlies are afraid of her. Truth be told, she sees too much." "How is she treated?" Victor asked, dreading the answer. Martha's expression darkened. "Not good, especially lately. Her father's coming to visit next month. Doctor wants her showing improvement by then." "What does that mean?" "Means they're increasing her laudanum, keeping her isolated more, breaking her spirit." Martha shook her head. "Saw it happen to others. They go in fighting, come out like ghosts." Victor's decision was made before he even left Martha's small house. He couldn't stand by and watch Persephone's spirit be crushed. The question was how to help her escape without putting her in even greater danger. Over the next few days, Victor gathered information. The asylum's security was relatively lax at night, with only 2 orderlies on duty. The women were locked in their rooms, but Martha had access to keys as part of her cleaning duties. The biggest challenge would be getting Persephone away safely and finding somewhere she could go where her father couldn't find her. When he approached Martha with his half-formed plan, she surprised him by immediately agreeing to help. "Been waiting for someone to ask," she said simply. "That girl deserves a chance." Together, they refined the plan. In 1 week, during the new moon, when the night would be at its darkest, Martha would help Persephone escape through the laundry room door on the asylum's east side. Victor would be waiting with horses, the newly trained buckskin, for Persephone and his own gelding. They would ride east toward the mountains, where Victor knew of an abandoned trapper's cabin they could use temporarily. The night of the escape arrived with a sky full of clouds that further darkened the moonless night. Victor waited in the shadows of the pine trees beyond the asylum's east wall, his heart pounding. Both horses were saddled and ready, with provisions packed for several days' journey. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Victor was beginning to fear something had gone wrong when he finally saw movement at the laundry room door. Martha emerged first, looking anxiously in both directions, then beckoned behind her. Persephone slipped out, still wearing the gray asylum dress, but with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Victor led the horses forward as silently as possible. Persephone's face, pale in the darkness, lit up with recognition when she saw him, then with wonder when she noticed the buckskin mare. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I promised I would," Victor replied, helping her onto the mare. "Do you remember how to ride?" A smile transformed her face. "Some things you never forget." Martha pressed a small bundle into Persephone's hands. "Change of clothes, some food. God be with you, child." "Thank you," Persephone said fervently, "for everything." They had just started toward the tree line when a shout came from the main building. A lantern flared to life, illuminating the yard. "Ride!" Victor commanded, and they spurred their horses into the darkness. Behind them, bells began to clang, and more shouts followed. Victor led the way through the trees, following a path he had scouted earlier. Persephone kept pace easily, her body remembering the rhythm of horseback riding, despite months of confinement. They rode hard for nearly an hour before Victor finally slowed, listening for sounds of pursuit. The forest around them was quiet except for the normal night sounds and their horses' heavy breathing. "We need to keep moving," he said. "They'll be searching come daylight." Persephone nodded, her face set with determination. "Which way?" Victor pointed northeast. "There's a cabin about 20 miles from here. We can rest there, then decide what to do next." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Victor watched Persephone carefully, concerned about her strength after months of asylum life, but she showed no signs of weakening. If anything, each hour of freedom seemed to invigorate her. Dawn was breaking when they reached the trapper's cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled in a stand of pines with a creek nearby. Victor helped Persephone dismount, noting how she winced slightly. "You're sore," he observed. "Worth every ache," she replied, looking around at the mountains with wonder. "I'd forgotten how beautiful the world is." Inside, the cabin was dusty but sound. Victor built a fire, while Persephone changed into the clothes Martha had provided, a simple blouse and skirt, that were a vast improvement over the asylum dress, which she burned in the fireplace with evident satisfaction. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hard bread, Victor outlined their situation. "Your father will have men searching. The asylum will too, if only to avoid scandal. We need to keep moving, but first, you need rest." Persephone's expression grew serious. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Kincaid? You're risking everything for a woman you barely know." Victor considered his answer carefully. "I believe in freedom. What they were doing to you, it wasn't right. And when they catch up to us, what then?" "If," he corrected. "If they catch up, and if they do, I'll face the consequences." She studied him with those penetrating green eyes. "They'll say I've seduced you, that my madness is contagious. They'll ruin you." "Let them try," Victor said simply. A small smile touched her lips. You're either very brave or very foolish, Victor Kincaid. Most would say the latter, he admitted, returning her smile. They rested for a few hours, taking turns standing watch. By mid-afternoon, they were ready to move again. Victor's plan was to head further into the mountains, away from settlements where they might be recognized. "Where are we going?" Persephone asked as they mounted up. "I know a place in Idaho Territory," Victor replied. "A small mining town called Idaho City. I have a friend there who might help us. It's a long journey, though." "I'm not afraid of long journeys," she said, her chin lifting with determination. "I'm more afraid of cages." For the next week, they traveled carefully, keeping to wilderness trails and avoiding towns. They hunted for food and slept under the stars when no shelter was available. Victor was continually impressed by Persephone's resilience and practical skills. She could hunt, make fire, and tend the horses as well as any man he'd known. At night, as they sat by their small campfires, she told him her story. Born to wealth in Boston, she had always chafed against the restrictions placed upon her. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of a father who saw her only as an asset to be traded for business advantages. "I was expected to learn needlepoint and piano, to speak French, and to smile prettily at my father's associates," she explained. "But all I wanted was to read philosophy and science, to ride horses and explore the world." When she was 20, her father had announced her engagement to Edward Blackwell, a shipping magnate whose business alliance would benefit the Ainsley Railroad interests. "I refused," she said simply. "Father locked me in my room for a week. When he finally let me out, I pretended to accept my fate. Then I stole money from his safe, cut my hair, dressed as a boy, and ran." She had made it all the way to Wyoming, where she found work at a ranch. For nearly 8 months she had lived freely, working with horses and earning her own way. Then her father's men had found her. "They said I was having a breakdown, that I was a danger to myself," she said bitterly. "They drugged me and took me to Montana, to that place. My father visited once, told me I would stay there until I was cured of my rebellious nature." Victor listened, anger growing within him at the injustice she had suffered. "And now?" he asked. "What do you want now?" Persephone looked up at the stars, her expression thoughtful. "To live on my own terms, to never be caged again." She glanced at him. "What about you? What do you want, Victor?" He considered the question seriously. "Land of my own. Horses. A life where I answer to no one but myself." "We want the same thing, then," she said softly. As they traveled, Victor found himself increasingly drawn to Persephone. Her intelligence, courage, and fierce independence awakened something in him he hadn't known was sleeping. She challenged his thinking, made him laugh, and impressed him daily with her endurance and adaptability. For her part, Persephone was discovering what it meant to trust another person completely. Victor never tried to control her decisions or dismiss her ideas. He treated her as an equal, a partner in their journey. The walls she had built around her heart after years of betrayal began to crumble. 10 days after their escape, as they camped in a sheltered valley in the Bitterroot Mountains, a late spring storm forced them to seek better shelter than their makeshift lean-to. Victor found a small cave in the hillside, just large enough for them and their minimal gear. The close quarters made both of them acutely aware of each other. As thunder crashed outside and rain poured down in sheets, they sat side by side, sharing body heat against the cave's chill. "We should reach Idaho City in about a week, if the weather improves," Victor said, trying to focus on practical matters instead of the scent of her hair or the warmth of her shoulder against his. "And your friend there, you trust him?" Persephone asked. Victor nodded. "Ezra saved my life once during a cattle drive. Bandits attacked our camp, and he took a bullet meant for me. He left the drive after that, headed to Idaho to try mining. Last I heard, he'd done well for himself." "And you think he'll help us?" "Ezra believes in settling his own debts. He'll help." A particularly violent thunderclap made Persephone jump slightly, unconsciously moving closer to Victor. He hesitated, then put his arm around her shoulders. "You're safe," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her face inches from his. "I know. With you, I've never felt safer." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands, Victor touched her cheek. Persephone leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Persephone," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. She opened her eyes, and whatever she saw in his face made her smile. "Victor," she replied, and it was answer enough. When their lips met, it was like coming home to a place neither had known existed. The kiss was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, then deepened with shared hunger and need. Victor's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, while Persephone's hands framed his face, her fingers tracing the contours of his cheekbones and jaw. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Victor pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you in that garden." Persephone laughed softly. "Even in that hideous gray dress?" "Even then," he confirmed, smiling. "You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Her expression grew serious. "Victor, we're both fugitives now. My father won't stop looking. The life you wanted, land, horses, freedom, it might not be possible if you're with me." "The life I want has changed," he said simply. "Now it includes you." She searched his eyes, looking for doubt or hesitation, but found only certainty. "I won't be anyone's burden." "You could never be that," Victor assured her. "You're my partner, Persephone. We'll find a way forward together." Outside, the storm began to abate, but inside the cave, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of passion long denied and newly discovered. That night, in the shelter of stone and darkness, Victor and Persephone surrendered to feelings that had been building since their first meeting. Their lovemaking was both tender and fierce, a claiming and a giving that left them both transformed. Afterward, as they lay entwined in their shared blankets, Persephone traced idle patterns on Victor's chest. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed. "Freedom and love together." Victor kissed her forehead. "You deserve both, and more." Morning brought clear skies and new determination. They packed up their meager belongings and continued their journey westward, now with an even stronger bond between them. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they crossed into Idaho territory, but their spirits remained high. 4 days later, however, their luck changed. They had stopped at a small creek to water the horses when Victor spotted dust in the distance riders, moving fast. "Get your horse," he said urgently. "We need to move." Persephone didn't waste time with questions. They mounted quickly and pushed deeper into the forest, hoping to lose their pursuers among the trees. But the riders were gaining, their fresher horses making up ground quickly. "We need to split up," Victor said grimly. "They might follow me if they think I'm the one who took you." "No," Persephone protested. "I won't leave you." "Listen to me," Victor insisted. "Ride northwest. There's a canyon about 3 miles from here. Cross the stream at the bottom and follow it until you reach a waterfall. Behind it is a cave. Wait for me there." "And if you don't come?" His jaw set determinedly. "I'll come." With reluctance, Persephone agreed to the plan. They shared one desperate kiss before parting, Victor heading south to draw their pursuers away, while Persephone rode northwest toward the canyon. Victor led his pursuers on a wild chase, using every trick he had learned in years of working cattle to confuse his trail. He crossed streams, doubled back, and laid false tracks. By nightfall, he was confident he had lost them, and turned back toward the canyon where he hoped Persephone was safely waiting. Meanwhile, Persephone had found the canyon and the cave behind the waterfall. It was cold and damp, but secure. As hours passed with no sign of Victor, her worry grew. Had he been captured, or worse? By dawn, she had made a decision. If Victor didn't return by midday, she would go looking for him. She wouldn't abandon him, not when he had risked everything for her freedom. Just as the sun reached its zenith, splashing light through the waterfall's curtain, Persephone heard a sound outside the cave. Grabbing the small knife Victor had given her, she moved to the edge of the waterfall, prepared to defend herself. Relief flooded her when Victor appeared. Wet and tired, but unharmed. She rushed into his arms, heedless of the cold water spraying around them. "You came back," she whispered against his neck. "I promised I would," he reminded her, holding her tightly. "Always." They rested in the cave that day and night, allowing themselves and their horses to recover. Victor had managed to throw off their pursuers, but he knew it was only temporary. They needed to reach Idaho City and Ezra's protection as soon as possible. The next morning, they set out again, now less than 2 days' ride from their destination. The journey was tense, both of them constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit. But luck seemed to be with them, and they encountered no one but a few distant trappers who paid them no mind. As they crested a hill on the second day, the mining town of Idaho City came into view in the valley below. Despite its name, it was little more than a collection of rough wooden buildings strung along a main street, with mining operations visible in the surrounding hills. "It's not much," Victor admitted, "but it's a place to start." Persephone smiled. "It looks like freedom to me." They rode into town cautiously, aware of the curious glances from locals unused to newcomers. Victor led them to a small saloon at the end of the main street, the weathered sign identifying it as the Lucky Strike. Inside, they found a typical frontier establishment, a long bar, a few tables for cards, and the perpetual haze of tobacco smoke. The bartender, a burly man with a full beard, looked up as they entered. "Looking for Ezra Collins," Victor said, approaching the bar. The bartender's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who's asking?" "Victor Kincaid, old friend from Wyoming." Recognition dawned in the man's eyes. "Vic Kincaid? The cowboy who saved Ez from that stampede?" Victor nodded, relieved that his reputation had preceded him. "That's me." The bartender grinned. "Ez owns this place now. He's in the back office. Go on through." Victor motioned for Persephone to follow him. They found Ezra Collins in a small room behind the bar, poring over account books. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. "Victor Kincaid, as I live and breathe." He stood, extending his hand. "What brings you to my little corner of Idaho?" Victor clasped his friend's hand firmly. "Need your help, Ez. This is Persephone Ainsley. We're in some trouble." Ezra's keen eyes took in Persephone, noting her exhaustion and the determined set of her jaw. Then he looked back at Victor, seeing something in his friend's expression that made his eyebrows rise. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "Tell me everything." Over the next hour, they explained their situation, Persephone's imprisonment, their escape, and the pursuit they were sure would eventually reach Idaho City. Ezra listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or frowning. "So," Victor concluded, "we need a place to lie low until we can figure out our next move. I was hoping you might have work for us, maybe a cabin somewhere out of the way." Ezra leaned back in his chair, considering. "As it happens, I do have a small cabin about 5 miles outside town. I use it as a hunting lodge occasionally. But it's yours if you want it," he smiled at Persephone. "And I could use help here at the saloon. My previous barkeep ran off with a miner's wife last month." Relief washed over Victor's face. "Thank you, Ez. We won't forget this." "One condition," Ezra said, his expression turning serious. "You tell me the whole truth. Are you two married?" Victor and Persephone exchanged glances. "No," Victor admitted. Ezra nodded. "Then you should be, if you're planning to stay here. Small towns talk, and you'll have enough trouble without adding scandal to it. Preacher comes through every other Sunday. Until then, we'll say you're husband and wife." Persephone spoke up for the first time since their story began. "Would that protect Victor legally? If they come looking for me?" "It might," Ezra acknowledged. "A husband has rights over his wife that others don't. Your father's men would have to prove the marriage invalid." Victor took Persephone's hand. "It's your decision," he said quietly. "I won't force you into anything, not even to protect us." She squeezed his hand, her eyes soft. "You're not forcing me. I want this, if you do." The look they shared spoke volumes, and Ezra cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, that's settled then. For now, let's get you both fed and rested. You look dead on your feet." Ezra provided them with a room above the saloon for the night, promising to take them to the cabin the next day. After a hot meal and baths luxuries they hadn't enjoyed since leaving the trapper's cabin, Victor and Persephone found themselves alone in the small but clean room. "Are you sure about this?" Victor asked as they prepared for sleep. "Marriage is a big step, especially under these circumstances." Persephone approached him, placing her hands on his chest. "I've never been more sure of anything. You gave me back my freedom, Victor. But more than that, you gave me a chance to love and be loved." She smiled up at him. I want to be your wife, not because it's safer or more convenient, but because I love you. Victor's heart swelled with emotion. I love you too, Persephone, more than I thought possible. He cupped her face gently. I don't have much to offer you, no land yet, no fine house, just myself and a promise to respect your freedom always. That's more than anyone has ever offered me, she said softly. And it's all I want. They sealed their promise with a kiss that led to more, their bodies expressing what words could not fully capture. In each other's arms, they found not just passion, but a profound sense of homecoming, of finally being exactly where they belonged. The next morning, Ezra drove them to the cabin in his wagon, along with supplies to see them through the next few weeks. The small structure was rustic but sound, with a main room containing a fireplace and kitchen area and a separate bedroom. A stream ran nearby, providing fresh water, and the surrounding forest offered plenty of game. It's perfect, Persephone declared, surveying their new home. Ezra helped them unload the supplies, then prepared to leave. I'll be back in a few days to check on you. In the meantime, stay close to the cabin. Word is there are strangers in town asking questions. Victor's expression darkened. Already? Afraid so. 2 men arrived yesterday evening, showing a sketch of a woman who looks a lot like your wife there. Ezra's use of the term was deliberate. I told my barkeep to say he hadn't seen anyone matching that description. Thank you, Ez, Victor said sincerely. We owe you. Ezra shook his head. Just returning the favor. You stay safe, both of you. After Ezra left, Victor and Persephone set about making the cabin habitable. They cleaned, organized their supplies, and Persephone discovered a small herb garden behind the cabin that could be revived with some care. Victor checked the perimeter, identifying escape routes and defensible positions just in case. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating a simple stew Persephone had prepared, Victor broached the subject they had been avoiding. We need a plan for when they find us, he said. And they will, eventually. Persephone nodded, her expression resolute. I've been thinking about that. My father's legal control over me exists because I was declared insane. If we could prove I'm not, how would we do that? Victor asked. A medical examination by a reputable doctor, testimony from people who know me, evidence that I'm living a normal, productive life. She sighed. But even then, my father has money and influence. He could make things difficult. Victor considered this. What if we went further west, California, maybe, or Oregon? Start completely fresh where no one knows us. Persephone's eyes lit up at the suggestion. We could. There's nothing holding us here. Her expression grew thoughtful. I have some money, not much, but enough to get started. I sewed it into the lining of my boot before I ran away the first time. Victor smiled at her foresight. That's my clever wife. The word wife made them both pause, then smile. It felt right, despite the unusual circumstances of their union. We should be married properly before we leave, Persephone said. If we're going to start a new life, I want to do it right. Victor reached across the table, taking her hand. I want that too. 2 weeks passed in relative peace. They settled into a routine at the cabin, with Victor hunting and chopping wood, while Persephone tended the garden and made the cabin more homelike. Ezra visited twice, bringing news from town and taking Victor's list of supplies they needed. The preacher was due to arrive that Sunday, and they had decided to risk going into town for the ceremony. Ezra had assured them he would have friends watching for any sign of trouble. The night before, as they lay in bed wrapped in each other's arms, Persephone voiced the concern that had been growing within her. What if we're being selfish, Victor? Your life was simpler before me. You had dreams, plans. Victor propped himself up on one elbow to look down at her. Do you think I'd be happier without you? He asked, his voice gentle but serious. No, she admitted. But I worry that someday you might resent the complications I've brought into your life. He shook his head firmly. Never. Persephone, before I met you, I was just existing. Working, saving, planning. But for what? An empty house? A lonely life? He traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. You've given me purpose, partnership, love. I wouldn't trade that for all the uncomplicated days in the world. Persephone's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I love you, Victor Kincaid. And I love you, Persephone Ainsley, soon to be Kincaid. He sealed the promise with a kiss. Sunday dawned bright and clear. They dressed in their best clothes, Victor in a clean shirt and his least worn trousers, Persephone in a simple blue dress Ezra's sister had given her. They rode into town cautiously, taking back trails to avoid being seen. The service was held in the town's small schoolhouse, the only building large enough to accommodate the congregation. Afterward, with about 20 of Ezra's friends as witnesses, Reverend Samuel Miller performed the simple ceremony that legally joined Victor and Persephone as husband and wife. By the power vested in me, the Reverend concluded, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. Victor's kiss was gentle but full of promise. When they turned to face their impromptu congregation, the cheers and well wishes warmed their hearts. For a moment, it seemed as if their troubles were behind them. The celebration continued at the Lucky Strike, where Ezra had prepared a small feast. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the saloon, creating memories neither Victor nor Persephone would ever forget. It was during a quiet moment, as Persephone chatted with Ezra's sister by the bar, that trouble finally found them. The saloon doors swung open, revealing two men in expensive Eastern suits, accompanied by the local sheriff. The music stuttered to a stop as everyone turned to look at the newcomers. Victor, who had been talking with Ezra across the room, immediately moved toward Persephone, but one of the men spotted her first. That's her, he declared, pointing directly at Persephone. Persephone Ainsley, escaped from Whispering Pines Asylum in Montana Territory. The sheriff stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Madam, these gentlemen have papers saying you're a fugitive. They're authorized to take you back to Montana. Persephone's face paled, but she stood her ground. My name is Persephone Kincaid now, Sheriff. I was married today right here in Idaho City. She held up her hand, showing the simple gold band Victor had placed there hours earlier. And I am not insane. The sheriff looked confused, glancing between Persephone and the men who had hired him. Is this true? About the marriage? Reverend Miller stepped forward. It is indeed, Sheriff. I performed the ceremony myself, with plenty of witnesses. The taller of the two men, who had the look of a lawyer about him, produced a document from his breast pocket. That doesn't matter. This woman has been legally declared incompetent and placed under her father's guardianship. Marriage or no, she must be returned to proper care. Victor finally reached Persephone's side, placing a protective arm around her waist. My wife isn't going anywhere with you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The second man, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. You must be Kincaid, the one who abducted her from the asylum. His tone was cold. There's a warrant for your arrest as well. Ezra moved to stand beside Victor and Persephone. Sheriff Wilson, you know me. I vouch for these people. The lady is not insane, and there was no abduction. They're good folks who just got married in our town. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. I don't know what to do here, Ezra. These men have legal papers. Then we'll get legal papers of our own, Ezra declared. Judge Whitman is due in town tomorrow for circuit court. Let him sort this out. The lawyer began to protest, but the sheriff raised his hand. That seems fair to me. The lady and her husband will remain in town until tomorrow, when Judge Whitman can review the situation. He turned to Victor and Persephone. I'll have to ask you to stay at the hotel tonight, under my supervision, just to be sure everyone abides by the judge's decision. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than Persephone being taken immediately. Victor nodded his agreement, keeping Persephone close to his side. We'll come too, Ezra said firmly, as witnesses that they've done nothing wrong here. The night at the hotel was tense. Persephone barely slept, despite Victor's reassurances. What if the judge sides with them? She whispered in the darkness. I can't go back there, Victor. I can't. Victor held her tightly. I won't let that happen. We'll run if we have to all the way to California or even Mexico. Morning came too quickly. They dressed solemnly, preparing to face whatever the day would bring. When a knock came at their door, Victor answered it to find not the sheriff, but Ezra, grinning widely. Get your things, he said quietly. We're leaving, now. What? Why? Victor asked, confused. No time to explain. Just trust me. Ezra's expression was urgent. They gathered their few belongings quickly and followed Ezra down the back stairs of the hotel. A wagon was waiting in the alley, driven by a woman they recognized as Martha Wilson from the asylum. "Martha!" Persephone exclaimed. "How?" "Later, child," Martha said, gesturing for them to climb in the back of the wagon. "We need to move." As they settled beneath a tarp in the wagon bed, Ezra explained hastily. "Martha arrived late last night with news. Your father is coming, Persephone. Those men were just the advance party, and they've bribed Judge Whitman in the past. He won't be fair." "But how did Martha find us?" Victor asked, bewildered. Martha chuckled from the driver's seat. "Followed those two from the asylum. Wasn't hard, they're city men who don't know how to cover their tracks. Been trailing them for weeks." The wagon rumbled through the back streets of Idaho City, avoiding the main thoroughfare where the sheriff might see them. At the edge of town, they turned onto a little-used trail heading west. "Where are we going?" Persephone asked. "Oregon," Ezra replied. "I have a cousin in Baker City who owns a livery stable. He can use help, and he's not one to ask too many questions." Victor looked at his friend in amazement. "You arranged all this in one night?" Ezra shrugged. "Been planning it since those men showed up in town. Just had to wait for the right moment." He smiled at Martha. "Having an ally arrive unexpectedly was a stroke of luck." "Not luck," Martha corrected. "I promised I'd help, didn't I? When you took Miss Persephone, Mrs. Kincaid now, I hear from that awful place. I knew they'd come after her, so I quit my job and followed. Took some time to catch up." Persephone reached over the seat to squeeze Martha's shoulder gratefully. "You're a true friend, Martha." They traveled all day, pushing the horses as much as they dared. By nightfall, they had crossed into Oregon territory, following the trail toward Baker City. They camped in a sheltered grove, keeping the fire small to avoid detection. As they sat around the fire, Ezra produced a bottle of whiskey and 4 tin cups. "Seems like we should celebrate properly," he said, pouring a small amount into each cup. "To Victor and Persephone Kincaid, may your life together be long and free." They clinked cups and drank to the toast. Then Martha raised her cup again. "And to new beginnings in Oregon." The journey to Baker City took another 4 days. Along the way, they discussed plans for their new life. Ezra's cousin Daniel owned not just the livery stable, but also a small ranch outside town. He was willing to let Victor and Persephone live and work there, well away from prying eyes. "It's not the dream ranch you talked about," Persephone said to Victor as they rode side by side on the final day, having switched from the wagon to horseback for faster travel. "But it could be a start." Victor smiled at her, love evident in his eyes. "As long as we're together, I don't care where we are. We can save, build something of our own eventually. And if they keep looking for us, then we keep moving," he said simply. "But Oregon's a big place, and your father's reach has limits, especially now that you're legally married." Baker City proved to be larger than Idaho City, a growing settlement with a proper main street lined with businesses. Daniel Green, Ezra's cousin, met them at his livery stable, a tall, lean man with the same direct gaze as Ezra. "So, you're the fugitives," he said after introductions were made, looking them over appraisingly. Then he broke into a smile. "Good. This town could use some excitement." Daniel's ranch was modest but well maintained, with a small house for the main residents and a cabin nearby for workers. This cabin would be Victor and Persephone's new home. "It's not much," Daniel apologized as he showed them around the 2-room structure. "But it's sturdy and private." "It's perfect," Persephone assured him, already envisioning how she would make it a home. Ezra and Martha stayed for a week, helping them settle in. Before continuing their journey, Ezra back to Idaho City to manage his saloon, and Martha further west to Portland, where she had a sister. "You'll write when you're settled?" Persephone asked Martha as they said their goodbyes. "Of course," Martha promised. "And you do the same. I want to hear all about your new life." Life at the Green Ranch quickly fell into a routine. Victor worked with the horses at the livery in town 3 days a week, and helped with ranch duties the rest of the time. Persephone took charge of the vegetable garden, expanded it significantly, and began selling excess produce at the town market. She also discovered a talent for breeding and training the ranch dogs, developing a line of exceptional herding collies that brought additional income. 6 months after their arrival in Baker City, With no sign of pursuit from Persephone's father or the asylum, they began to relax their vigilance. They made friends in town, joined the small church congregation, and even attended social gatherings occasionally. It was at the harvest dance that autumn that Persephone shared her news with Victor. Pulling him away from the festivities into the cool night air, she took his hands in hers, her eyes shining. "I'm with child, Victor," she said softly. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday." Joy transformed Victor's face. He lifted Persephone off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her down gently. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." Persephone nodded, laughing through happy tears. "Due in late spring, the doctor thinks." Victor placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "I love you, Persephone Kincaid. You've given me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Persephone remained active, working in her garden and with her dogs, until Daniel and Victor insisted she slow down in her final months. The cabin had been expanded over the winter, with Victor adding a small third room for the baby. On a beautiful May morning in 1878, after a night of labor attended by the local midwife and the doctor from town, Persephone gave birth to a healthy son. They named him Samuel Ezra Kincaid, honoring both the reverend who had married them and the friend who had helped them find their freedom. As Persephone nursed their son in the early dawn light, Victor sat beside them, overwhelmed by love and gratitude. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed. "Thank you for giving me a family." Persephone smiled tiredly. "We gave it to each other." The next few years brought both challenges and joys. A harsh winter killed several of the ranch's cattle. A dispute with a neighboring rancher over water rights led to tense times. But there were many more good days than bad. Samuel grew into a strong, curious toddler with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined nature. Persephone's garden and dog breeding business flourished. Victor's skill with horses earned him a reputation throughout the region. In the summer of 1880, with money they had saved carefully, Victor and Persephone purchased a small parcel of land adjoining Daniel's ranch. It wasn't large, just 40 acres, but it was theirs. They built a modest house with their own hands, Persephone working alongside Victor on every aspect of construction. The day they moved in, carrying 3-year-old Samuel across the threshold of their new home, was one of the happiest of their lives. "Our own place," Victor said, looking around the simple but comfortable main room. "Just like we planned." "It's only the beginning," Persephone replied, setting Samuel down to explore. "We'll add to it year by year." Life settled into a new rhythm on their own land. They planted an orchard, expanded Persephone's dog breeding operation, and Victor began breaking and training horses for ranchers throughout the area. Samuel started school in Baker City, riding there on his own pony, a gift from Daniel for his 5th birthday. In the spring of 1882, Persephone gave birth to twin daughters, Evelyn Martha and Lillian Rose. The family was complete, their happiness seemingly untouchable. They had almost forgotten the specter of Persephone's past until the letter arrived. It came by regular mail, addressed to Mrs. Persephone Kincaid in an elegant hand she immediately recognized. Her father's penmanship. Victor was in the barn when Persephone found him, her face pale, the unopened letter clutched in her trembling hand. "It's from my father," she said simply. They sat together on a hay bale as she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. "My dear daughter," she read aloud, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "I write to inform you that I have known of your whereabouts for some time. Your marriage, your children, your seeming contentment, none of this has been hidden from me." Victor tensed beside her, but she continued reading. "I have had much time to reflect on my actions regarding your future. I believed I was acting in your best interests, providing security through an advantageous marriage. I see now that I was wrong. Your mother would be deeply disappointed in me." Persephone paused, surprised by this admission. "I am an old man now, and my health is failing. Before I depart this world, I wish to make amends. I have instructed my solicitors to release your inheritance, the portion your mother left specifically to you in her will, which I wrongfully withheld. The sum is considerable and has been deposited in the Baker City Bank in your name." Persephone looked up at Victor in shock. I didn't know my mother had left me anything. Keep reading, Victor urged gently. I do not ask for forgiveness, nor do I expect a reconciliation. I simply wish to right one wrong before it is too late. The search for you has been called off permanently. You are free to live your life as you see fit, without fear of interference from me or anyone acting on my behalf. The letter was signed simply, Your father, William Ainsley. Silence fell between them as Persephone folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Do you believe him? Victor finally asked. Persephone considered the question carefully. Yes, I think I do. He was always proud, but never a liar. She leaned against Victor's solid warmth. It's over. Truly over. The next day they visited the bank in Baker City and were astounded to discover the size of Persephone's inheritance enough to purchase hundreds of acres of prime ranch land and still have money left for improvements. But they didn't rush into decisions. Over the next few months, they discussed their options carefully, including whether to move further west or stay in the community that had become their home. In the end, they decided to stay in Baker City, but expand their operation. They purchased an additional 160 acres adjacent to their existing property and began building what would become the Wild Heart Ranch, named for Persephone's untamed spirit that Victor had always cherished. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family and constructed proper stables and kennels. Victor established a breeding program for quality horses, while Persephone continued developing her line of working dogs. Together, they created a place known throughout Oregon for its exceptional animals and the fair dealing of its owners. Samuel, growing into a thoughtful young man, showed a gift for working with the horses like his father. The twins, as different as sisters could be, found their own paths. Evelyn with a talent for numbers and business, Lillian with a love for medicine and healing. One evening in the summer of 1890, as Victor and Persephone sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, he took her hand and brought it to his lips. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Running wild with a cowboy all those years ago? Persephone smiled, the lines around her eyes speaking of years of laughter and living in the open air. At 35, she was more beautiful to him than ever. Never, she replied firmly. Being caged was death to me. You didn't just set me free, Victor. You showed me I could be both free and loved. She leaned against his shoulder. And you kept your promise. You've never tried to tame me. I wouldn't dare, he chuckled. I like you wild. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the vast Oregon sky, they remained on the porch, hand in hand. Their children were healthy and thriving. Their ranch was prosperous. Most importantly, they had built a life where both could be exactly who they were meant to be, partners running wild and free together across the land they called their own. The asylum, the pursuit, the years of hiding, all had faded into the past, important parts of their story, but no longer defining their lives. What remained was the love that had begun in the most unlikely of places, a walled garden where a wild-hearted woman had refused to be broken, and the cowboy who had recognized her spirit as something to be cherished rather than contained. In the years that followed, the Wild Heart Ranch became a landmark in eastern Oregon. Victor and Persephone's reputation for integrity and quality spread throughout the West. Their children grew and eventually brought partners of their own to the family, expanding the ranch's operations and its heart. Samuel married the daughter of a neighboring rancher and took over management of the horse breeding program, introducing new bloodlines and expanding their reputation. The twins followed their passions, Evelyn handling the ranch's finances with remarkable acumen, and Lillian becoming the first female doctor in Baker City, treating patients in a small clinic on the ranch property. Through it all, Victor and Persephone remained the heart of the operation, partners in every sense. They aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. The fire between them never dimmed, though it transformed from the desperate passion of youth to the steady, enduring flame of a love tested by time and trials. When visitors asked the secret to their successful ranch and their obviously happy marriage, Persephone would always give the same answer: freedom and respect. We gave each other both from the beginning. And Victor would add, with a loving glance at his wife, and we never tried to tame each other's wild hearts. It was a lesson their children carried forward, and their grandchildren after them, ensuring that the legacy of Wild Heart Ranch would continue for generations to come, built on the foundation of a love story that began with a daring escape and the courage to run wild together.